It would be more of a slow moving call than a specific moment. But when I first became a Christian, I was 17 years old, went to a local church, sat at the back row, and I was listening to the guy preach, and there was something about what he was doing in that moment, teaching the word and encouraging people to believe in a God who is who God is. And I just remember feeling in my soul that that's what I was called to do. And so I started pursuing that, and as I pursued it, something that just kept just being there but never being realized was that I had a sense that one day I would plant a church, and I was making decisions around that and thinking through that and looking to be developed in that way without ever actually coming to the conclusion that I felt specifically called to plant a church, but it was just happening in the background. And then I had this moment when I joined Newlife, and Brisbane had just been planted up in Albert Street, and I had this moment of lament, a moment of regret when I said, I wish I had gone up so I could have seen what a church plant looks like, and I could have learned stuff. And about a week later, they announced Coolangatta was being planted, and I just, everything in me went, that's where I'm called to be. This is what I'm called to do. And so I've been on that journey since then, went down to Coolangatta, and now we're in Coomera. It's demographic. I definitely feel a sense of call to a specific demographic, but it's also non-bind. It's not geographic. I remember feeling this kind of conviction in my soul when I got asked in an interview in front of our staff, where do I feel called to plant? And there was someone else there, and he was like, "Why?" straight away. And I just sat there and went, I don't know. All I know is that I'm called to plant a church to preach the gospel, and I don't mind as long as there are people there, people to share that with. And then as I developed and explored it, it became more, the demographic was like families. And I have a lot of my family lives up in Coomera and Upper Coomera, and I just started getting this real sense of call to this specific region. I started looking at the statistics of growth, and this is where most people who grandparents and parents had lived on the Gold Coast affordably had then moved up to Coomera because they had been kind of priced out of the suburbs they'd been raised in. And then I started finding out the statistics of like domestic violence and family brokenness, divorce, financial hardship facing the area, and it just started riling something within me. And I got passionate. I got excited for my firm and foremost belief is that if there is a church plant, if there is a church in a region, that region should be better off because it's there. If there are Christians that worship God on a street, that street should be better because those Christians are on that street. And I just started getting excited for the vision of like, what would it look like for there to be another church actively pursuing wholeness in families and hope for people who right now think there's no hope, and just believing that there are people in Coomera right now who have not met Jesus, who could not envision their lives knowing Jesus, and yet Jesus is steadily calling him towards them, and we use people in our community to do that. So the first practical step was talking to Ralph and me. In all fairness, I think the first practical step was conversations with people. There were lots of people up there. There's obviously Uniting North was the church that were opening conversations with us. And that was kind of what began the practical process. Presbytery got involved. It began a discernment process, took a number of years. And so that's very practical. But beyond that, I would say the less tangible act of planting in the church and the more, spiritual, living reflection on that happening within me, within my family, within the community we're cultivating, was to just quite literally pray. There wasn't. I wish there was a more sophisticated answer, but it seems to work. And so we prayed, and it was an undeniable assurance, not only by me, but I invited quite a number of people and voices into it, and they began to pray. And then there were these great big doors in the way that were like, no, this will never happen. We'll pursue it, but when it doesn't happen, then we'll look at what God might be doing in a different way. And so we continued pursuing it, and then we prayed, and then doors that shouldn't opened, and opportunities that shouldn't have existed. And so it all kind of started with a few conversations and just with a great deal of prayer and discernment from a lot of people. When we think of normal church plants, you think of someone going out to a new place, meeting in a, dingy I don't know, lounge room or something, inviting everyone in, building a small group, it becomes a church. What we did was a church plant by partnership and with the hope of revitalization of an existing congregation. And so slightly different model. And one of the challenges of that was that there is an existing congregation and there's a new congregation. And in the kind of third week, that began to bubble up, change management, just a great deal of discontent and fear around what change meant. And I remember I was writing a sermon and I had this great conviction. The only thing I had a conviction on was this sermon had to be not at a macro level, not a great big kind of theoretical sermon, but it had to be personal and practical. The last few sermons have been a little bit more, here's the big vision for our community, and I felt God was putting on my soul to speak directly to the people in the room. And I said in this space, and as I was praying about this space, I was in the shower where God speaks the most loudly to all human beings. And I was standing there showering, and the sermon just started hitting me, like the scripture started coming together, and I started thinking that's an awesome application of that scripture. And then I went down, I wrote the sermon, and as the week progressed, the issues that were coming up began to fit perfectly into the sermon that I had no intention of answering these issues with. And by the time I preached it on Sunday, I just had this message that directly spoke into the struggles, the fears, the challenges people were facing in the community. That wasn't be better and wasn't, you're not doing a good enough job. It was like answering with hope and vision and life. And I didn't for a second plan to write a sermon that would answer any of that stuff. It would just, God moved. And then I got to stand there and watch the faithfulness of God unfold in front of me. And the fruit from that was it was tangible. The response from people and the hope from people that came out of that was just beyond the way I could strategically imagine doing. So it was a really faithful moment for me from God. I'd say life as a church planter is very similar to ordinary everyday life. I think the distinction of a church planter is hope. I think in ordinary everyday life, we kind of just roll through life, taking things as they come and believing people are people and things are things. But the great distinction of a church planter is that the very definition of the role demands hope. It demands vision. I see a person who in any other circumstance would just be a person, and instead I'm called to see someone God could use to mobilize, impact, influence his kingdom in this region. And it's by what merit? God's. And so it's hard, and I look at causes and ministries and streets with houses in it, and instead of seeing streets with houses and shopping centers and coffee shops, we see ministry opportunities, and the great big question in the heart is, what is God doing here? What could God be saying here? What might I be involved with in this moment through a little bit of faithfulness, through a little bit of hope, through a little bit of vision? And so how is life different? By the very definition of the call, I am someone who has to live with hope regularly, which comes with its own drawbacks. When that hope isn't met, when how long do you stand for, and all those kinds of things. But yeah. I think I've been really fortunate to be in a church plant surrounded by people who kind of have seen church plants happen. And the consequence of that has been a great deal of love and a great deal of support from the community. Probably the thing I'd say is that the person planting the church is not your savior. The person planting the church is not a saint. The person planting the church is not a better Christian than the person attending or someone else. The person planting the church has a calling, and their calling is to inspire and rally towards a vision that God's doing, and to call us to a biblical standard of life and kingdom living. And that's one calling. And then every person in the church, that there is no church plant without the participation of the church members. There's just a person trying to do a thing. And we're not trying to build organizations and institutions. We're trying to build or be a part of, participate in building the kingdom of God, continue existing in our world. And so the one thing I would say is, what does it look like to be, what's one thing I wish everybody knew about church planting is that stop thinking the church planter matters that much. You matter, that the person on the church plant matters. Every member of the church is carrying weight, or should be carrying weight, and should be released to be a key stakeholder in the life, vision, and culture of the community being built. Yeah, we had someone come along to the church, and when I first met this person, I was, yeah, they were from a walk of life and a stage of life that I had nothing to do with. I'd never engaged in. I had never, I just didn't know how to interact well. And they were walking through a season of life where they had high pastoral needs. And I remember when they first started coming, I would argue sinful, but a very real response was not a groan, but just like this inward tension, this fear of like, is there anything I can do to support, to minister, to love this person? And um, I felt the conviction was just press on. It was just love this person, just go and just do what we would do for anyone. And so I just began to rally community. We listened. They were in my small group. We were just doing life together. And I began to hear, remerging regular themes of challenge and struggle. And I began to see, okay, I know what that looks like. I know how we can respond to that. This stuff, no idea, but we will journey together. And after a period of time, they not only did they just get so involved, things began to break, things began to fall off that were like toxic and destructive, and just in the place of what had been this like pastorally dense struggle that had been going on for years and years and years. There was now like this kind of optimistic hope that God was doing a thing. They had met their people, they had community, and what began to happen was, in a place where I had first conceived, and my initial sinful instinct was there was deadness. This was more of a burden than a blessing. They began to go to their workplaces and inviting people to our church, people who were not Christian, and people began to encounter the living God through this person's experience and testimony. And I just felt like, in my heart, it was just this statement of, I am able. And it was just God saying, I can do this in spite of you. Like, it's not what I bring, it's not what I do. It's like the miracle I got to witness, as far as I'm concerned, is God saying, stop making it your capacity, stop making it about your ability, and start making it about mine. And we've got people currently actively engaged in our church who know Jesus because God was able. And this person loves Jesus because God is able. And so just, yeah, it was not like a fire and thunder miracle, but it was just such a beautiful moment where I saw the faithfulness of God. When I was involved at Newlife Coomera and we had the church plant going on there, I began to see God doing things that really weren't us. And it began to challenge my notion of, I guess, how much is us and how much is him. And I began to see just random things take place. Someone donates a coffee machine out of the blue, doesn't have any relationship with our church, and then a few weeks later someone gets saved through Alpha, who is a barista and looking to start their own cafe. And you go, we did neither of those two things. I mean, we held the Alpha and we opened a church, but we did neither of those two things. And now they've married perfectly and we have a community space downstairs. And just stuff like that happened. Someone would leave, they're going, to Perth or something. And then the next week, someone would come with the exact call, the exact passion, the exact heart. And it would be someone we've known the whole time, but suddenly we're hearing for the first time about this calling they sense on their soul that perfectly fills a gap they didn't know existed. And just stuff like this happened over and over again. And the faithfulness of God is a theme that probably cannot be overly dramatized or overly expressed. God is faithful, and it's visible, it's evident. And so how have I changed? I go and plant a church, and suddenly it's not, the pastor at Newlife Coomera being like witnessing faithful of God and me just getting to see it happen, but it's like, it's my responsibility now to stand there and know what is true. My God remains faithful. He will build his church. And so I'm just, I guess theology becomes practice, and something I know in my mind and heart to be true. I now have to put my money there. I have to put my treasure, my confidence, my heart there, and go, no, my God is still able. My God is still faithful. He would use an absolute pleb like me to reach people he's called and designed since the beginning of since before the foundations of time to reach. And I get to be participating in that, not by my merit, but by his. And I'd say it's just changed me through confidence. More than anything else, a confidence in him. And the act of having to weekly practice trusting in him the way my theology says I should, it just grounds something. I would say it's just grounded something inside of me. I mean, principles, we have a little 7-month-old at home, and when we planted 4-month-old, principle for me is that, I mean, Timothy qualifies elders, and it talks about how if a person can't manage their household, how could they manage the household of God? And I think to me, there's this principle deep inside of me that the church of God should look somewhat similar to the way a home looks. The pastor has a role, and it's a familial, it's a family role. And so for me, the principle that I've had first and foremost is my family will come first. And I thought that might be a burden, or I might have to justify that more, and I've been blessed to not have to. This is a boundary. I will stand for my family, and I'm not budging on that has allowed for a great deal of health and trust to exist between me and my wife. When I've had to do late nights, long weekends, and I've had to be available and very flexible, there's just this, no, the family comes first, and so I can trust in that space, and it's been very liberating. In that way, that'd be a huge principle. As for regular rhythms, I have a baby at home, so rhythms have been hard. But right at the top of the list would be the centrality of including God in prayer, in worship, in regular moments, as often as possible. This is not my game. I haven't built a church. I am not planting a church. I am standing in faithfulness to God, doing a thing, taking the gifts I've had according to the call I've had, and partnering with a whole community of people as a church is established in a region and continues to be established in a region. And so for me, it's like, if God isn't building this, if God isn't doing it, I don't want to go. And so we got to, like for me, a rhythm that's just been so central and yet so hard and so challenging to stand for has been making sure I remember that I don't do this by me. I do this in relationship with God. So just praying, sitting in worship, meditating, pausing. A couple of days ago, I put a 10-minute timer on, and I just refused to think a thought. I just sat still and just like, I will be still and know that you are God, because I was getting ahead of myself and getting stressed. And so yeah, rhythms of just keeping God central. It's not I will spend an hour a day in prayer and reading my Bible. It's I will do life with God, and I will do it in relationship with Him, and watch and marvel over His involvement and engagement in this space. It's not Hollywood. It's probably the advice I would give more than anything else. Whatever vision, whatever thing you expect it to look like in a dramatized, the world will be transformed way, take that and believe for it, but don't put it in a microwave and expect it to happen overnight. Like the advice I'd give is, it's not a 90-minute action flick where the entire world will be transformed on the other end. We stand faithfully, and we build over a long time. And we know and we believe and we stand firm that God is able to do what God is going to do. And if He's put that vision in your heart, the way He's put a vision in my heart, God is able and faithful to do it. Our role isn't to rush it, it's to wait on it and to pray consistently and persistently for it, no matter what. And so just be okay with huge visions, but don't try and Hollywoodize this kind of like, it will have this perfect, neat crescendo and go exactly how I imagine. You'd be better off just saying, and I will faithfully wait on this vision, and I will see my God move, because I believe we will. I think first and foremost, stop making church planting here. I would say there's very few churches that are not able to participate in a church plant. We just have to change the model and expectation of what a church plant looks like. For instance, when I was at Newlife, Rabina, I led a small group, and it got reasonably large. And the pastor at the time said, hey, I'd like to plant some more small groups. And I said, I don't have anyone in my group yet who's ready to lead a group. And she was like, well, why don't we change our thinking, what it means to plant small groups? And so she invited me into this conversation where 3 different small groups came together, some contributing different members, some contributing a leader. And we formed this kind of like new thing that existed. And all 3 of us got to celebrate planting a new small group. And I don't think it's any different for churches. We just have to come up with models and ideas. And more importantly than both of those, we have to believe it's worth worth it. Planting churches is statistically the most effective way to reach the lost, to break ground and to see things happen in communities. And that can be revitalizing churches, that can be through planting entirely new hubs. But until we truly believe that this stuff works, and until we're willing to believe that we can participate in it, I just don't know how it'll happen. So believe it can happen, and believe God can do it, and believe that you have a role to play. That's probably the word I've said a lot throughout this, and I would just say hopeful. It was a toss-up between faithful and hopeful, but hopeful because God is faithful. Hopeful because I believe that God is not finished yet with his church. And hopeful because ordinary, everyday people were the people God chose to use to build his church back then, and is doing that again today. And we don't need superheroes. We just need faithfulness. So, yeah, hopeful.